Some of the world's wonders might say, "I was lost, then I was found," if they could speak. One of them is Machu Picchu, the once lost city that was abandoned in the 16th century and rediscovered in the 20th century. Another one is Angkor, the dazzling city in Cambodia that was never really lost, but needed a lot of restoration to regain its splendor. There are also cities that are perhaps only legends, such as El Dorado, the lost city of gold, or the lost city of Z, that attracted explorers from Europe who never came back. But today we'll talk about the greatest legend of them all, the evidence that the lost city of Atlantis existed. The story of Atlantis begins with the ancient Greek philosopher Plato, who you may have heard of. He is considered one of the most influential thinkers of all time, who wrote the Socratic dialogues, came up with the allegory of the cave, and developed ideas on justice, law, and education that we still value today. So, if Plato was the one who told the story of Atlantis, should we believe him? Well, while some people still think Atlantis was real, most others say Plato made up the story as an allegory, meaning the story had a deeper message behind it. Plato said in 360 BC that the Atlanteans had a wonderful life. If such a place existed back then, Atlantis would have been one of the best places to live in the world. The people who lived there were human, but also had divine qualities, according to Plato. The location of the island is a matter of debate, with different theories placing it in the Mediterranean, near Spain, in the Pacific, the Caribbean, or even close to Antarctica. The island was described as having a main island with smaller islands around it. It was a beautiful place, where exotic animals roamed freely, and precious metals were abundant. It was said to be a utopian society, before the word utopia was coined by Sir Thomas More in 1516 to describe the ideal human civilization. You can imagine, Atlantis was supposed to be perfect in every way. The Atlantans also had a powerful navy that no one could challenge. So as we said, many people don't think this place actually existed, and Plato used it as an allegory of hubris. Hubris is when someone or something becomes too arrogant and forgets their limits. For the Greeks, it meant excessive pride, violating the bounds set for humans. We all know what happened to the Greeks in their myths, when they became overconfident and thought they were almost equal to the gods. They were punished severely and often violently. And that's what happened to Atlantis. Plato's story tells us that the people of Atlantis, who lived a luxurious and prosperous life, became corrupted by greed and power. They lost their moral values and started to wage wars against other lands. Maybe Plato saw this as a fate that could befall any great civilization. And that's why we have a theory of declinism. The gods were angry with the Atlantans and sent them disasters such as earthquakes and floods. Plato wrote, "And in a single day and night of misfortune all your warlike men in a body sank into the earth, and the island of Atlantis in like manner disappeared in the depths of the sea. For which reason the sea in those parts is impassable and impenetrable, because there is a shoal of mud in the way. And this was caused by the subsidence of the island." And that was the end of Atlantis. But this story may not be entirely fictional. Plato was not only aware that societies can become corrupted, and that greatness can turn into its opposite, but he also knew that civilizations can be destroyed by the forces of nature. He knew that a huge volcanic eruption could wipe out a whole population. So we have to ask, did Plato invent this story, or did he base it on a real civilization with some exaggerations? Some scholars think that such a place existed, and they have tried to prove it throughout history, even though they have been called pseudo-archaeologists. Let's see what they say. One man who revived the Atlantis story in the 19th century was Ignatius L. Donnelly. He was a U.S. congressman and a part-time scientist who wrote the book Atlantis, the Antediluvian World. It's important to know what kind of a man he was, because he believed that Atlantis was a world that was technologically and morally superior to other places. He once wrote about America, saying, "Corruption dominates the ballot box, the legislatures, the Congress. The people are demoralized. The newspapers are largely subsidized or muzzled, public opinion silenced, business prostrated, homes covered with mortgages, labor impoverished." That was in 1892. And we can hear similar things today. He believed that Atlantis was a great culture, and that it influenced other ancient cultures, such as the Maya culture. He said in his book, "There now lies beneath the waters of the Atlantic, covered, doubtless, by hundreds of feet of volcanic debris, an amount of gold and silver exceeding many times that brought to Europe from Peru, Mexico, and Central America since the time of Columbus." But he had no solid evidence for his claims. Still, he made many people think about Atlantis again, as a utopia that showed that something better than the corrupt modern world existed. He even said that the Garden of Eden was in Atlantis, and that the reason for the sinking of the city was the great flood mentioned in the Old Testament. But to believe his theory, you also have to believe in the great flood, and not everyone, even some Christians, are sure that it happened. There is a theory that Atlantis was actually somewhere off the coast of the Bahamas. Thanks to Donnelly, many writers started to say that Atlantis was real. One of them was Charles Berlitz, who in the 1970s said that the Bermuda Triangle had swallowed the city. People agreed with him, because underwater near the Bahamas, there is something called the Bimini Road. This is a large group of stones on the ocean floor that look like the remains of a sunken city. But geologists say that this is just a natural formation. Then there is the theory that Atlantis was part of Antarctica. Some people think that Atlantis was once part of Antarctica, and that it broke away from the frozen continent about 12,000 years ago. This idea was proposed by Charles Hapgood in his book, Earth's Shifting Crust, in 1958. He claimed that Atlantis was a warm and advanced culture that was destroyed by a cataclysmic event. However, this theory has been rejected by modern scientists who have a better understanding of plate tectonics and how continents move. Another possibility is that Plato was actually referring to the Minoan civilization. This was a prosperous and influential culture that flourished on Crete and other islands in the Aegean Sea from around 3500 BC to 1500 BC. The Minoans were known for their art, architecture, trade, and navigation. But they also suffered from natural disasters, such as earthquakes and volcanic eruptions, that damaged their buildings and made them vulnerable to invasions. Maybe Plato used the Minoans as an inspiration for his story of Atlantis, and exaggerated some details to make a moral point about the rise and fall of civilizations, and the dangers of corruption and hubris. But what about Graham Hancock, the controversial author who challenges the mainstream views of history and archaeology? Have you heard of him? He is famous for exploring ancient mysteries and taking psychedelic substances like ayahuasca. He believes that these drugs can open our minds to other dimensions and reveal hidden truths about our existence. He also believes that there is a connection between all living things and that we can access the memories of our ancestors. Hancock is not alone in his quest for alternative explanations of the past. Dr. Rick Strassman, a respected scientist who conducted experiments with the powerful hallucinogen DMT, also reported that his subjects experienced strange visions and encounters with other beings. Michael Pollan, a renowned writer who investigated the effects of psychedelics on the human mind, also described a sense of merging with the universe and having a mystical experience. Does this mean that they have found evidence for Atlantis? Not necessarily. But it does suggest that there might be more to reality than what science can explain. Hancock himself does not claim that Atlantis definitely existed, but he does argue that there were ancient civilizations that were more advanced than we think, and that they were wiped out by a global catastrophe around 12,000 years ago. He thinks that there are clues and traces of these lost cultures all over the world, and that we should look for them with an open mind. Some people have proposed other locations for Atlantis, such as the Black Sea, Ireland, or Madeira, but none of these theories have any solid proof to back them up. The only source we have for Atlantis is Plato, and he might have made it up as a fictional example. Until we find more convincing evidence, we can only speculate and imagine what Atlantis was like. Now we want to hear from you. Do you think Atlantis existed? Where do you think it was, and what was it like? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to check out our other videos. Like, share, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.